All right, well, welcome to our workshop today. Today is a session on managing course files, and we're calling it Managing Course Files, Maximizing Instructor Workflow. That sounds very official and exciting. So we have 90 minutes together today to meet about 5 outcomes that I'll list here in a moment. I see a lot of familiar faces, so welcome back for those of you who have joined us in the past. Welcome to some new folks who I know I haven't seen before, so we are excited to have you here. My name is Stephanie Rodick, and I am the manager of professional learning, which is one of the units in the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning. Carol, do you want to introduce yourself and we'll go down the row?
Sure. My name is Carol Hemmerly. I am an educational technologist with the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning.
And my name is Charles Williamson. I'm an instructional designer in the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning.
Hi, I'm Queenie Chow, and I'm a consultant at OD. I'll be mainly in the chat window with you here today. So I'm going to post something in there right now, just so you see it maybe flash up on your screen if you haven't located the chat window already. We'll pause periodically to take questions that are coming in through the chat. So feel free to type them in there or wait for the pause. Either way, I will help presenters keep track of those. And if you have anything you need, please let us know. I'll just be posting links and supplemental resources down there for you as well.
Thank you, Queenie. All right, so I mentioned that we have 5 outcomes. So by the end of today's session, here are the things that we hope that you'll be able to do. The first is that you are able to explain best practices for file management for your own course. And that includes organizing your files, naming your files, sharing those files, and giving permissions. And then we also hope that you'll be able to differentiate the types of files that are best suited for file storage areas. So we have some choices to make. So hopefully by the end, you'll be able to understand better what types of files are best suited for which areas. Third, we hope that you'll be able to explain how storage tools create efficiency. So really important, right? We're so busy and we have so many things. So we are hoping by the end of today, we can really focus on which kinds of things can you use to be more efficient with your time. And then we hope that you can maximize the potential of various applications. We're going to talk about a few of them to help this file management process feel a little bit more seamless. And then finally, we will share some resources along the way. As Queenie mentioned, she'll be monitoring our chat and sharing quite a number of resources. So make sure that you save the chat as before you leave us today. She'll share with you some directions on how to do that. And then we'll also share a couple of resources at the very end. So we have a lot of things that we're going to talk about today. But in order to help us figure out, what kinds of examples or what we need to emphasize, it's helpful to get to know you a little bit. So we are curious if you could tell us we'll do this as a poll. What is your teaching role here at Ohio State? So are you teaching a course? Are you supporting the teaching of others like Queenie and Carol and Charles and I? Or maybe you are facilitating workshops like us. Maybe you're hosting meetings. And if you have any other that we haven't listed, please feel free to put that in the chat. So far, we have 87% of you teaching a course. So we have a lot of instructors in the room, Carol and Charles. All right, I'm going to give you 10 more seconds and then I'm going to close the poll. All right, we got 97% of folks. So let me share the results for our facilitators. So Carol and Charles are going to be the ones doing all of the stuff in the middle of the workshop. So it's helpful for them to know that, look, we have 88% that's teaching a course. So this is perfect because this is really about your course files. However, I will tell you, I was here planning this session with the two of them. And I think, how many times did I say like, I don't do that. Yes, those naming conventions make a lot of sense, but I sure haven't done that in the 22 years I've been here at Ohio State. So even though I think it's really useful for instructors, it's really useful for other folks who are doing workshops or supporting everyone else. We see a lot of people hosting meetings as well. So hopefully you'll be able to get what you need from this session. The next question I have will be helpful for us to know. It is, have you fully transitioned from Buckeye Box to OneDrive yet? So the university is doing this in batches. So we kind of wanted to get a sense of, have you done this transition? So I'm just going to do this one as a reaction. So there's a reaction button down at the bottom. So in the chat, if you could let us know yes or no, or give us a reaction, a thumbs up, a celebratory something that kind of indicates raise hands. I see a couple of X's, so not everyone has, but there are quite a few who have, which is good. So we're about split, facilitators, in terms of how many have and how many have not. It's almost exactly split. So not everyone has done that yet. All right, so thank you everyone for sharing. So based on our outcomes for this session, this is the agenda. It's chunked into 3 major parts. The first will be about those best practices for general file management. The second will be about understanding when and why to store different files and kind of in different spaces. And then the third will be making file management kind of a seamless process. We're going to be kind of pulling things together. And then at the very end, we'll make sure that we leave some additional time for questions and go over further resources. So at this point, I will let Carol and Charles take it away.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. So the first thing we're going to be talking about today is general file management best practices. And we've sort of separated that out into 4 different areas. So first, we're looking at some standard naming conventions for files, how to organize files and folders, separating course files from other types of work that you might be doing, which obviously would be relevant for all of those instructors out there. And then lastly, sharing files and changing access and permissions of files in OneDrive, since we're sort of going under the premise that most of you either have or should be soon transitioning from Buckeye Box to OneDrive very shortly. So the first one that we have here is just a very general list of basic naming conventions. And I guess going into this, I want to say that most people already have some standard naming conventions that they're already using. So most people aren't just like randomly naming their files and trying to figure out what's going on, though I'm sure that there are some of you that might be doing that. I live in the house with someone who stores all of their files in their downloads folder. So people are at various levels of like how they're managing those files. But some best practices for managing files are naming your files consistently, using short and descriptive names for your files. And that means that not using the default of just like naming all of your files document or all of your files untitled, but sort of thinking through how somebody mentioned in the chat, they're guilty of that. Oh, Stephanie. So yes, so it's just a general good practice to sort of use a method for naming your files. The next thing that's mentioned there is avoiding spaces and special characters in your files as much as possible. So instead, you would want to be using like underscores, dashes, or capitalizing the beginning of each word in a file name. For the most part, a lot of people use spaces when they're naming files, and it doesn't always create a problem, but there is a potential for problems if you're using like a lot of random characters, especially if you're planning on ever posting files to a website or something like that. I don't know if you've ever noticed that when you do that, if you have spaces in the file name, once those are posted, the internet changes those to like a series of random characters, and it makes it difficult if someone's trying to look for that file later on, perhaps on the website, because the file naming is weird. It sort of has reformatted it for you. And then the last thing to keep in mind, if you have files that evolve over time, which many instructors do, it's important that you don't necessarily want to save over that same file over and over again. So you start making multiple copies of that file, one for autumn, one for spring. And when you're doing that, it's important that you sort of are using a standard naming convention. So those are being organized. And the easiest way to do that is to use year, month, and date, sort of at the beginning of those files, which will keep them all in order. Obviously, if you were starting off with like the month, then all of the files that were in January would be at the top of your list instead of those being organized chronologically if you're doing it by year. Some other tips and tricks that I would mention for naming conventions are that a lot of people will put like numbers at the beginning of a file name, which will force it to the top of like an alphabetically ordered list. And that can be helpful if you know that you constantly go to the same folder or the same series of files many times throughout a day or a week. It's nice to have those toward the top of your list. And at the same time, to name files that maybe you no longer use any longer, like things that you don't want to delete it, but you want to sort of like archive it. You can create sort of like an archive folder and start that off with the letter Z, which will put that toward the bottom of your list of files, which is helpful sometimes. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is looking at two file management examples. So we have one on the left and one on the right. Those are the main ones we're looking at. The file management example there toward the middle is just, sort of a silly look at what might be happening in some people's file folders. Hopefully that is not you. But we are looking at the one on the left and the one on the right. So I want you to take a look at how these two folders are being managed using file management strategies and whether or not they are following the file management strategies that we just looked at, or if they're sort of diverging from those and where they're diverging. And maybe is it a good idea that they diverge from that file management naming convention, or if it would be better if they approached it differently. So go ahead and take a look at these. And then in the chat, you can note any problems that you might find and what they're doing with these naming conventions, or anything that you think that they're doing well. Yeah, so Kaylee mentioned that some of them are not very descriptive, and that would definitely be a problem if you were trying to find those files in the future. So I'm looking at an example of that might be the example on the right, where it has like toward the very bottom, there's a file that says P116001, a series of numbers and letters ending in a PDF. And that probably is not going to be helpful if you are trying to find that file in the future. Other people mentioned some of the file names are too long. Somebody said, Sherry says, middle demonstration, untitled and number. It's a waste of time to find these files. Abigail says, can't really tell what files are in the left are all about. Yes. So Henry says the list on the left uses syntax. It segments the file name into sections, each of which presumably refers to the same kind of thing. So those are actually some good things about it. They also use the naming convention with files that you might not be looking at much any longer. They started off those folders with like Z's, which sort of put those toward the bottom of the list. So they are using some naming conventions that they're trying to use those to help them organize their files, but not all the time. So there are some pros and cons. And again, we're not trying to say that all of you have to be like, military style naming your files, because nobody's going to do that. But you need to have some sort of strategy that makes sense to you and that will help you find your files in the future. So moving on, we wanted to talk about organizing your files and folders, and there are several things to keep in mind here. So in general, for organizing your files and folders, we are recommending that you use OneDrive, and specifically the Documents folder in OneDrive, to hold all of your files and folders. Within that Documents folder, typically you would start nesting additional folders in there to create some sort of logical hierarchy within your file management system that is specific to you and makes sense for the work that you're doing. You do want to avoid complex or deeply layered folder structures. And some of you might already have something like that. And it works for some people, but for a lot of people, especially if you have a lot of files that have sort of accumulated over years and years, you might have inadvertently created a very complex system where it makes it you've become so organized, it makes it difficult for you to find the files you need to find because they're like nested in so many different folders. So you do want to create a logical hierarchy, but at the same time, not make it too specific where you have so many things nested, it makes it hard to find things. And then the last thing, it's probably the most important aspect of organizing your files, and that is you need to make sure that you are filing as you go. And I would be the first to say that I do not follow this. I do not file as I go. I am the person who saves lots of things on my desktop because that's just the easy place to save something. When I open a new file and I'll save it, and I do name it. So I'm doing part of that well, but I save it on right to my desktop. And basically what I have to do is go through maybe once a week and like sort of go through and like drag all those files into the appropriate folder in my OneDrive and make it somewhere where it makes sense. And oftentimes when I do that, I might even rename the file at that time to make it specific to like how it's going to be nested in my file structure so that I can find it later on. It just makes things easier. So just like I have a teenager at my home, and when I ask her to clean her room, it gets clean for like a day, but then maybe, I don't know, not even a day later, I'll take a look at the room and it literally looks like a clothing bomb exploded in that room. And that can quickly be the same scenario for your files. Like if you're not sort of following a system of keeping things organized, even if you like organize at once, you sort of need to sort of stay on top of it and make sure that you're keeping it organized as you go, as time evolves, as time goes on. And then going on to the next slide, this is very specific to instructors. So this is looking at managing course files. And what I would recommend if you're trying to manage your course files is that you have a folder in your OneDrive that's just called courses. And you might even put a 1 at the beginning of that to make sure that it comes to the top of your list of folders. And then within that courses folder, creating specific folders for each course that you teach or have taught in the past. And within those, that's where you start nesting. If you teach one course multiple times over a period of years, you might want to have a folder for each term that you've taught that course, or perhaps each year. But whatever you do, if you are doing something where you're trying to keep things organized, you'd want to make sure that you're starting off with the year, so that way they're sort of sequentially organized and that you can quickly be like, oh, I remember I did something 2 years ago in this course. And so I can quickly go into that folder and look at those files and find what you need if you need to do that. But I taught for like 20 some years. And I know that helped me a lot in keeping my courses organized and keeping them, because I remember I had done something in activity 3, 4, 8 years prior. And I was like, I want to look at that. It's because I remember I really liked that. And why did I stop using it? So oftentimes I'll find things I used to use and then bring them back into my course if I need to.
So to reiterate some of the best practices that Carol has shared with us, we wanted to share with you some folders and subfolders that exist within the distance education repository space. And right here, you can kind of see the way in which we're recommending some of these folders and files, the best way in which they can be arranged in a way that is legible and clear. We have like a system of folders and subfolders. And within those subfolders are a series of documents that are clearly labeled and named. There's a veritable explosion of underscores as you can see here. Not a space and empty space in sight. The naming conventions are very clear and logical and easy to follow. Everything is arranged automatically, alphabetically, but there shouldn't be an issue trying to find anything here for the instructor. And that's, to kind of underline something that was said earlier, these are not best practices, shouldn't be prescriptive. It shouldn't be a set of practices that you follow rigorously and to the letter beyond, despite the fact that they don't work necessarily for you, but rather these should be adapted to kind of fit whatever works best for you. So again, feel free to internalize and interpret these practices as however you would like. And to reinforce this even further, I would like to take a couple of minutes to tackle this little exercise. So what we see here are a pair of snapshots of some files from a course from an instructor who, to be charitable, is having some struggles with file management. So what I want us to do is to take a few moments to really look at the way in which these two folders are arranged. And we have here on the left, the main folder where all of the files and subfolders are kind of listed. And then we have a snapshot of the docs subfolder. What I would like for us to do is to kind of take a close look at these two folders, and in the chat, just kind of share some of what you see as potential problems with the way in which this particular instructor is employing file management strategies, what is unsuccessful, and what can they do to improve the way in which they're organizing their files within Carmen. I agree. Docs, images, a lot of these are very vague and unhelpful. Some of these are prefabricated, though. Some of these exist within Carmen whenever you first set up your Carmen shell. So doesn't necessarily mean that you can't change those, but yeah. Someone mentioned the lecture needs dates and topics, and we're going to get to this. The lectures probably shouldn't even be in Carmen. Carmen has a very low capacity, and with each video that you throw in there, you're just gobbling up more space that could be used more effectively elsewhere. Not all the files are in folders. Yeah, they're kind of like tossed around loosey-goosey. Folder names are unused, or if they are, yeah, they're not used consistently. So Abigail is mentioning that something she struggles with is the division of where to put file information. All of the file names are somewhere in the folders. And again, that's kind of like determined based on what practice works best for you. What kind of works within the system that you've already established. So yeah, somebody mentioned the lack of dates and stuff, and yeah, it's a veritable mess. So going to the next slide, we're going to move on. Sharing files in OneDrive, there's a veritable accordion of options in terms of the who, what, when, where, and how. You can kind of narrow the focus on the most granular level, or you can open your documents up to a more global, in a more global fashion. For instance, OneDrive files can be shared with a single person or a cluster of people. You can share your folder, you can share the entire folder, or you can share just one particular folder within that, or I'm sorry, one particular file within that folder. You can create expiration dates for publicly viewable links, or you can let those links exist, indeterminately. It can be shared or edited within a browser window, a computer's file directory, or even within a Microsoft 365 application. I know I use Teams pretty regularly. It interacts really well with OneDrive, and I feel like I open most of my documents and shareable documents within Teams nowadays. And how you can set editing privileges to whatever level, you can set mail notifications, or just copy the link directly and share that. So to kind of give you a snapshot of the ways in which we can share files, I wanted to kind of share these various images to show you the various levels of access and permission that are available to you when sharing a document on OneDrive. So in this first image, you can see this person giving their collaborator editing access to a group of people. So you have the box that allows editing is clicked, and you have a pre-selected group of people. Now for us, it's going to be anyone with OSU access. So that can be a little tricky if you're trying to share this with someone who is outside of that OSU access. You can also give editing access to a specific person or group of people. That's very easy to do. You would just need their email address. You copy paste it right there. And as long as they access OneDrive from that account, they should be able to edit the document. And finally, you also have the option of setting dates and or passwords while sharing. If you want to, be a little more secure with who you give editing access to, you're able to do that very easily. So the next slide is going to kind of walk you through a short demo of how to do this in OneDrive. I'm going to try to make sure my talking matches up with what I'm doing on screen here. So I'm kind of, if you follow the cursor, you can kind of see me showing you some of the options that are available to you in OneDrive. You can create a new document, you can upload a document, you can share, copy the link. For our purposes, what I'm going to start with is just creating a new document. So you press new, and you have various options here. I think I'm going to create a Word document. My computer was very slow this afternoon, apparently. And it defaults as document, which is not a very descriptive or helpful name. So I'm going to click the 3-dot icon, rename it, and we'll rename it as File Management Demo. Now, once we've created and renamed this document, you click on it, and you wait 1,000 years because my computer is just really lagging this day. And I'm going to share a secret with you guys. File management is fun. And from there, you click share on the upper right-hand corner. And again, that series of options is going to pop up immediately. You can select who you want to select to share this document with. You can share it with folks within the university or with the who have the link, or with anyone with an existing account or specific people. I'm going to allow editing for this document, and you can send it to them directly. Very superfluously, I'm going to send it to myself. Or you have the option to just click the link, and there's a button here that that says copy link, and you can just click copy and then copy paste it into an email or a Teams message or however you want to share this. So I want to take a moment to really ask you guys, how might the transition from Buckeye Box to OneDrive impact your sharing of files in your Carmen course? What are some of the things that you are considering right now as we're kind of going through this workshop? Oh, share it in the chat, obviously. Sorry. So Jason is mentioning assigning sharing for different collaborators. It's a big task. It is. It really is. It can be time consuming, but again, if you're someone like me who wants to make sure that you're limiting who's the collaborators, it's really helpful. So Melanie is mentioning that Box was a little more intuitive and OneDrive is a mess. There is a steeper learning curve, but I think that OneDrive is a very effective tool when utilized correctly and is easy to learn. And let's see. It won't let me create a new folder, says Melanie. I'm not exactly sure what the issue is there. So Karen mentions I don't use Buckeye Box for course materials, so I'm curious to hear why others would use OneDrive for teaching. That's a great point. I think we're going to get to this later in the workshop, but for now, let's just say that for any kind of document that you need to amend or edit or share, or anything that needs to be a living document, it's best to use OneDrive, because if you're using Carmen Canvas, those documents are fixed. They cannot be altered once you've uploaded them to Carmen Canvas. So I'm seeing a little bit of concern about OneDrive being a little more difficult to use compared to Box, though Box itself had its own set of had a steep learning curve as well for some folks. So I hope by the end of this presentation, and as we kind of further learn the ropes with OneDrive, we'll kind of find it to be a more useful tool than we did at the end of all this. Is OneNote part of OneDrive? It is part of that 365 family of products. So yes. Easier to, let's see, Teams was easy to use this spring. And yeah, Teams works great with OneDrive. Should we move on to the next slide?
We have a moment that we can take. We're pretty good on time, Charles. So if we want to take any additional questions for about 2 minutes or so before we move on to the next section.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're doing so well on time. So let's see. So Karen asks, I guess I am wondering why save on OneDrive instead of an office computer unless you are team teaching? Well, that's a great question. And as someone who has lost files due to computer malfunction or computer error, or just needing to reformat a computer, or just general mismanagement of my computer, like, again, this is a very do as I say, not as I do presentation, because I am guilty of doing this on my own computer. It is good to at least have a backup on OneDrive, if not use that as the source for your files. And again, it's very easy to share. It's very easy to collaborate. The autosave is a lifesaver. Yes, Kayla, absolutely. Because I cannot count how many times I have forgotten to click that save button. Does OneDrive have a note function similar to Box Notes? I believe it does. Yes, right? Can someone please confirm that? Because I have not really explored that function.
I have never really used Buckeye Box, so I am not sure. I do know that OneDrive, or the Office 365 applications have OneNote, and then that is offers a way to create notes, save notes, share notes with other people. But that's different than file management per se.
It is, and it's different from Box Notes considerably. Again, there requires some degree of learning a new application, but it is a very useful tool once you've learned how to utilize it correctly. So yes, Henry mentions that multiple users can work in a Word document at the same time. Absolutely. So, and collaborative work in OneNote can be a little problematic. So these are the sorts of considerations that you need to think through whenever you're trying to select what file type I need to be sharing with collaborators and colleagues.
So it looks like we're moving on to the next section here. And this section deals with selecting the right spaces for different file types. So the main 3 areas that we're looking in is OneDrive, Carmen Canvas, and then MediaSite for videos. And we will briefly talk about other spaces if you all bring those up. But I think actually a lot of the things that you all mentioned in the chat just now are particularly relevant for this next section that we're moving into. So the first thing that we're talking about is OneDrive. And it's interesting because when I'm looking at the chat, you guys are all bringing up both issues and sort of good responses to the whys of why you might want to choose OneDrive to store your files. So OneDrive is currently for Ohio State considered to be the default file storage location. Some people said that they're just storing files on their personal computers, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it is limiting, especially if you plan on sharing your files with other people or you want to work on your files with other people at the same time. That can be more difficult if you're not saving those files in OneDrive. OneDrive gives you a lot of versatility in that sense. OneDrive is supported by Ohio State. So if you do have issues, like some of you are mentioning, like you're trying to use OneDrive and you're having problems or you don't know what to do, or I would be the first to say that I have myself experienced some glitchiness with OneDrive at times where it's not like backing up all right correctly for me, or I'm having problems with file sharing. Since it's supported by Ohio State, you can get help through their IT department and they can help you with those issues. And then lastly, some people already mentioned files are automatically backed up on a regular basis using the Office 365 applications. Typically, you can click the little option to save the files for you automatically as you're working in files. But also, Ohio State is also backing up OneDrive. So if you have a problem with your own personal computer, where maybe something happens with your hard drive, Ohio State is backing up all of the files in OneDrive for you, which is a real benefit, particularly if you've ever lost your files. You know what that feels like and the frustration and true sense of loss. So it's nice to know that Ohio State's backing that up for you. Some OneDrive considerations or some reasons, I guess, that you might want to start using OneDrive more often. If you're currently using Google Drive or you're currently using just your own personal file storage space on your computer, OneDrive offers multiple access points for your files. So you can open up a file, maybe it's a Microsoft Word file. You can open that up using the Microsoft app on your computer. You can open it up in a browser window, like if you're using Chrome, you can open up that same file in your Chrome browser application. You can also open up the files, like if you're using your phone or an iPad or a tablet of some sort. You can open up these files in multiple different locations using different devices. I will say, and this is sort of mentioned at the bottom, the appearance of files can change in different access points. So while you may be able to open up that Excel document on your phone that you originally created on your computer, and other people can open it up on all these different access points as well, they'll look slightly different. Sometimes the usability is not as good if you're on like a small tablet or something. I have noticed that sometimes if I open up a file in my Word application and I'm working on it, if I open up the same file in my browser in that environment, I don't have the same options sometimes, or if the options are there, they're not in the same location. So it's a little difficult for me to find those. Yet at the same time, just the fact that I even can open up these things in these different access points if I need to me, that's a real benefit. It says Microsoft 365 integration with Microsoft Office applications, that they are all integrated together, and that is a nice aspect of it. You can easily share and collaborate on files, as we mentioned, and Charles just went over that in the previous slides about how those can be shared with other people or collaborated on. And again, for some of you who might be saying, I've tried to do this and I had an issue, sometimes there are issues with sharing files, or maybe you shared a file with someone, but then all of a sudden they don't have access. Typically, you can share it again, and then that access is available to them again. And again, sometimes I'm not sure why that happens, but it's something that is a little bit of a frustration, but it's also something you can typically get around or figure out how to resolve that problem. Since OneDrive is storing a lot of files in the cloud, it does require you to have a relatively healthy internet signal. And as someone who just had my internet worked on just yesterday because I was having internet issues, that can be something that you might want to think about. However, as I think somebody mentioned in the chat, I think Henry mentioned, you can save all of your OneDrive files to your personal computer, and then they will sync to the OneDrive cloud files that are out there. And so that while you're working on a file on your personal computer, if your internet goes out, you'll still be able to work on that file. But once it comes back on again, then it should sync then with the cloud file version of all of your files. And those should sync pretty seamlessly for the most part. And lastly, I mentioned the location and the availability of apps can change within access points. So sometimes when you're looking at a file in one access point, it might look slightly different in a different access, point. Like maybe the save function is in a different spot, or the ability to highlight something is slightly. You have to go somewhere else to be able to have that access.
So let's talk very briefly about choosing Carmen Canvas. What are some of the reasons you would use it? What are some of the considerations you need to take whenever you're using it, and so forth? So one of the perks of choosing Carmen Canvas is that storage of individual course files remains constant and is transferable to the next iteration of the course if you're importing it from the Carmen Canvas options. We don't have enough time to go over how to do that today, but there are various resources available to you on how to import your Carmen Canvas course. The uploaded files are also organized into these sort of, again, what you saw, the sort of prefabricated full folders. So uploaded files are organized into folders by topic or file type, including things like readings, media, infographics, and so on. And finally, Carmen Canvas allows you the option of organizing the course within weekly modules that makes coursework for students both legible and easy to navigate, and so forth. Some obvious considerations when using Carmen Canvas. So the files stored in the master Carmen course are included in each section of the course every time it's taught. And that means that if you're using older versions of certain files, those versions of the files are also going to be imported as well. And that includes things like your syllabus and weekly schedule, assignments that you might be revising, or if there are documents that you've created for group work or anything like that. And the constitutions of those groups are obviously going to change from semester to semester. A lot of that stuff needs to be amended. So the files themselves can't be modified once they're stored there. They are fixed, immutable, like a bug trapped in amber. So that is a major consideration you need to make whenever you're choosing Carmen Canvas. Which files can go without additional modifications? Which ones are living documents that need to be amended and changed on a regular basis? And finally, replacing a file with an updated version, it can be done. I mean, you can go in and just like upload a new version of the file, but then you have to manually go through all of the Carmen pages and change all of those links manually, which, trust me, as someone who does this professionally, can be a very time-consuming process. So to kind of give you a snapshot of what it's like uploading and doing anything in Canvas, we're going to play this short demonstration video. And a lot of folks ask us, where are the files? How do I access them? So whenever you're accessing Carmen Canvas and you're going to your, I'm sorry, I'm looping back in time. Hold on. Whenever you're accessing the course, on this left-hand sidebar, very helpfully labeled, we're going to zoom in real quick, files. And there they are. And they are accessible only to instructors or people with designer access. They are not accessible to students. So once we have access to our files, everything is listed very clearly legible folders here. We're going to create a new folder though. So I'm going to click this button that says plus folder. And what should I name this new folder? I've got an idea. I've got a very creative idea. It's going to be called new folder. Wow, I'm a genius. So you click that plus button And to upload new files, you have, obviously you can just click upload right there, or you can drag and drop directly from the folder in which the file is housed. So I'm going to just dump this file into Carmen, and I'm not really satisfied with the name here. So I'm going to click the 3-dot icon. I have a bunch of options. I think I'm going to go ahead and rename it though. So click rename, and you have the option again of renaming it and making typos. So once you're done renaming the file, click on the plus button, and that's about it.
All right, so I am now talking about MediaSite. If you're not familiar with MediaSite, and I'm guessing many of you are not, MediaSite is sort of the current file management system that the university is using instead of YouTube. So formerly, instructors were posting their videos, lecture videos, whatever, on YouTube, and then linking to those within their Carmen course. And the university now is discouraging the use of YouTube because they are starting to incorporate advertising into those videos, and they would prefer not to have students be forced to view advertisements before they watch your lectures. So for that reason, they have switched over to MediaSite, and it's sort of a controversial change. Some people are happy with the change or are fine with the change. Some people are less happy, but it does require you to start moving YouTube videos over to a new storage area. So you'd be using this for storage of video files that is supported by Ohio State. So if you have problems in getting your videos over to MediaSite or uploading videos using MediaSite in some way, you can use the Ohio State IT department to support you or help you. And if you have problems with MediaSite, MediaSite also offers video editing for instructors. It offers viewing analytics and interactivity options that you can incorporate into your videos. Some considerations for MediaSite. Again, as we mentioned, it is storing video files. So ideally, you're not storing your lecture videos for your courses. You're not uploading those into Carmen. Ideally, you're uploading those to MediaSite, and then you're sharing them from MediaSite in your Carmen course. Again, it's supported by Ohio State. Sorry, I'm sitting here. So I'm trying to get on the right slide here. So it offers analytics on student views, and that includes both aggregate analytics or information on like how many students are watching the videos, but also individual analytics on students' views. So you can look at specifically how long a specific student is watching videos, if they've watched any of the videos that have been posted, how long the videos are being watched by the class in general. All of that sort of information is available through MediaSite. You can also include knowledge checks into those videos. So if you are unfamiliar with what a knowledge check might look like, basically, if you have a longer video, you might decide to pause the video and pose a question to the student saying, explain the differences between something that was just mentioned in the lecture. And then that would require students to not only watch the lecture, but then sort of report out, this is what I just learned from this section of the video. And one thing to keep in mind here is closed captioning is not provided in MediaSite. That's something that is currently offered in YouTube. And there is sort of a workaround where you can get closed captioning from YouTube and then incorporate that into the MediaSite recording. It's sort of a roundabout way to get closed captioning into the video. But currently MediaSite is not offering closed captioning on its own, which is obviously important to include in the videos for accessibility reasons. There is information about how to incorporate the closed captioning into the MediaSite videos, but I'm hoping Queenie will be able to post in the chat. But that is something that you'll want to be aware of. Looking at this slide, this is showing some of the information that MediaSite provides to instructors about each individual that they are using in their courses. So it shows the dates that videos are being viewed. It shows the number of times that certain videos, or this video specifically, is being viewed on certain days. So it's showing like peak times. That's what you're seeing there in the upper right graph, like peak times that this video is being viewed. And then if you look at the bottom graph, it's showing like sort of hot areas of the video. So any area of the video, this is sort of being separated out into time increments for the video. So any area that's red is showing an area of the video that's being viewed by a lot of people. Any area of the video that is green is potentially showing an area where people are just like turning off the video, or they're not watching it at that time. So fewer people are viewing the video at the end of the video. And as you can see at the beginning of the video, a lot of people are viewing the very beginning. The area sort of in the middle that shows that that's a red area is showing where people are like sort of backtracking in the middle of a video to rewatch a certain section, which might be an indication to the instructor like, oh, students are realizing that this is an important section of the video, or maybe it's a difficult concept that you're introducing at that time and they need to go back and watch it again. So it is an interesting insight into how students are viewing the videos, both like over time, but also specifically when they're watching it, like what areas of the video they're finding to be important, or where maybe even where they're dropping off, like where a lot of students seem to be just turning off the video at this point in time. In addition to these more like aggregate sorts of data, it can also, as I mentioned, like list every single student in the course and how much time they spent watching any given video that's been assigned for the class. So that can be helpful information if you have a struggling student or a student who maybe is having a problem with a specific concept. You could see like, did they watch this section of the video? Or, oh, I can see that they went back on this video 3 or 4 times at this specific section. They're trying to get this concept. And that can be helpful for the instructor to like maybe decide what strategy to take to help them learn the information. And then the next thing that it's talking about here are the knowledge checks. So as I mentioned, knowledge checks in MediaSite, basically it's like a little quiz inside the video. So after you've maybe introduced an important concept, basically a little quiz will pop up in the video. It'll ask whatever questions you've entered at that point in time. Obviously, you want to make sure you're asking questions that pertain to what was just presented in the video. And then they will answer those questions and they'll get an immediate score. You can sort of decide, like, do you want to give them feedback immediately, or do you want to sort of wait till the end to give them feedback on how they did? But this is really nice information, again, for the instructor to have. It makes it so students can't just sort of like turn on the video and then do other things. It sort of encourages students to sort of actively engage in the lecture videos or whatever content that you're using these videos for, because it stops and won't move on until they sort of answered those questions. And it sort of reinforces content that you just went over. Just asking them to sort of think about it and answer a question about it helps students better incorporate that information into sort of long-term memory. Okay. Some instructors have wondered whether or not they can use these as like a scoring option, and they can. However, MediaSite doesn't actually transfer that information into Carmen for you. So MediaSite provides the scores that students got on those knowledge checks, but then the instructor would need to like go through, if they wanted to, go through and manually enter those scores into the grade book. So it's definitely something that, like, to me, the most important part of it is that how it's encouraging student engagement. And I think that that insight into students' understanding is a really great way to help students better engage in what you're teaching. So the next thing here, that this is a question that's being posed here, is how might you use MediaSite to help you gain insight into students' understanding of your content? So is there something that perhaps I mentioned that you could use specifically in your course, or some innovative way you could see yourself using the analytics provided in MediaSite to help you better understand how your students are learning? And you can pose anything that you might be able to do in MediaSite in the chat. So Beth mentioned that she might be interested in using the knowledge check function. When I realized that MediaSite was offering this, I thought that it would definitely be something that instructors would be interested in incorporating into their lecture videos. Again, this would be something that you could take an existing lecture video and upload it into MediaSite and then add the knowledge checks into it. So it's not something where you'd have to start over from scratch to do this. You can take something you already have, upload it into MediaSite, and add the knowledge checks in there. And then obviously you would basically just need to change the embed code in your Carmen course to bring in the new version of the lecture video. So Brian says, I use it to store the videos for my flipped course, but I don't have time for their analytics. The MediaSite interface is so bad. Oh, just scroll here. I just use Carmen quizzes to do the knowledge checks, and then it's in my grade book. And that is definitely an advantage if you are using the knowledge checks for, for a grading system, or for, to enter in grades. Definitely the Carmen quizzes are a better way to go if you want to do that. However, it's nice. One of the advantages of having the knowledge checks in MediaSite is that it does force the student to sort of engage with the video in an ongoing way. So if you feel like sometimes students are not watching the videos, or, you can see that the videos are being played, but you don't necessarily know, or you're wondering like why they're still not doing well, this could provide relevant information for you. I have heard other people say that MediaSite could be smoother. And I would agree with that. I do know that MediaSite is working to make that interface more functional for people. But I do think that it's definitely moving forward. And it's also, as I mentioned, it's supported by the university. So if you have problems, you always have a resource to go to if you need help.
We have just a couple of minutes. I know there's some unanswered questions that we may need to go back, and one of us may need to go and look and find an answer to.
Okay.
But if there are other questions, we can take about 2 minutes before we need to move on to the next part.
So we have 2 new messages. I guess a great idea for doing comprehension checks in world language learning. Allows for check right at the pertinent moment. And I do think that that's what's nice about it. It is important that you are posing questions that you're putting it at the exact right moment, because you don't want to pose a question where that information is then explained, 1 minute later in the video. So it is important to get those timed at the right moment. But MediaSite, I feel like their interface is pretty good about being able to get it right at the moment that you want to do that. Brian says, I do have short videos, 5 to 10 minutes. Built-in checks might make more sense if you do entire lectures in one video. Yes, that's true. If you have 5 to 10 minute videos, then actually that Carmen quiz function might be a better way to go. I typically see instructors that have longer lecture videos. So, and by longer, I would say maybe anything more than 10 minutes, I consider to be a longer lecture videos. If you look at, if you're using MediaSite, you can see that there's a big drop-off rate in viewing activity after maybe 7 to 10 minutes, which is an interesting insight to have just for no other reason than just to know that drop-off weeks do occur at that time. But if you're doing really short videos, which are really the recommended way to do lecture videos, have them very focused, then the Carmen quiz checks might be a better way to go.
I mentioned that we'll get to Holly's. She asked that question again. So we need to go get some information for 2 questions that we haven't answered yet. And hopefully I'd written this in the chat a little bit earlier. We are looking into the OCIO's office is looking into all of that integration. So that's why we're fingers crossed that hopefully we'll have better integration with Carmen and MediaSite soon. That ability is there. We just have to we always do this is one of the reasons why we only talk about supported tools here in OD. And that's because they go through all of the accessibility checks and they go through all of the security checks. Ohio State is really very good about making sure that we're only using tools that are good for all of us. So sometimes we just have to wait. So we're working on that. So why don't we go ahead and get started with their last section.
And I would like to kind of conclude this section or begin this section with a discussion of putting it all together. What are the nuts and bolts of creating a course in Carmen Canvas? And before I continue, I should apologize. My dog's in the background. He's asleep and you're probably going to hear him snoring. So some of the things we want to touch on for this section are establishing consistent LMS practices with templates and weekly modules, both of which we highly encourage you to use when constructing a course within Carmen Canvas, posting OneDrive files in Carmen, and embedding videos in Carmen. So essentially what we're advocating for is a very purposeful synthesis of the 3 various platforms that we've kind of advocated for you to use. I think these platforms, these tools kind of work best when they're kind of used in correlation with one another. So the Carmen template is something that we highly encourage every instructor, regardless of whether your course is in person, online, hybrid, regardless of the sort of mode in which the course is operating. We highly encourage you to kind of adopt the Carmen templates, which add visual consistency to course pages. It's also optimized for making, information legible and navigable and understandable and digestible for students, and also maintaining accessibility within your courses. So there is a link within the slide, and I'm sure Queenie is going to post this within the chat for where you can import or how you can import these from the directly into your own course. The link is right there, but if you kind of look on the right, you get a sense for the basic layout for all of the templates within Carmen, and there are various options, some of which are more HTML rich than others. So if you are an HTML neophyte or just, want to avoid things that are too visually dense or complicated, we have some options for you as well. So this is just one of many options that you can employ and import into your course. We also recommend dividing coursework into weekly modules. Just as when you're creating a course schedule, you kind of arrange that information or that material in a sort of digestible 1-week chunk. So too should that be arranged within Carmen Canvas, right? Coursework should be broken up into weekly modules. Each module should constitute a week. I've seen variations on this in the past, but generally the rule of thumb is 1 week equals 1 module. And everything is arranged into various categories and subcategories. The readings and lectures have their own page, and students know exactly where to go and which path to follow for each week's learning material, where to find the learning materials, where to find the learning activities, where to go for discussion or anything like that. Everything is very clearly labeled and very easy to follow.
And then I was going to be talking about ways to use OneDrive files in Carmen. And from what I'm hearing from all of you is many of you are already using Buckeye Box or sharing Buckeye Box files in your Carmen courses. And also some of you are just uploading files directly from Buckeye Box into your Carmen courses. So if hypothetically you were using a file that changes often. So sometimes their syllabus might change over the course of a term, or perhaps a calendar file that has a list of like the various assignments students are doing over the course of a term. There might be minor modifications to that file. I think Holly mentioned that she can make changes to that file and then go to Carmen and re-upload the course. And it's sort of like will modify, all of the links will stay the same for her as long as she doesn't change the file name. However, if you're using that or you're storing that file in OneDrive, you can set the permissions of that file to be that anyone with the link, hypothetically, could access that file just to view it, not to be able to edit the file, but just to be able to view that file. If you shared that link, that link for that OneDrive file that's your syllabus or your calendar or any other file that you might see the need to update over the course of the term, then anytime you make changes in that file in OneDrive, you would not need to re-upload it into your Carmen course. It would just automatically, when students clicked on that syllabus file or that calendar file, whatever that file might be, it would automatically bring up that file in OneDrive and you have edited it, and it's just the current version of that file is there for you. I was under the impression that sometimes instructors, when they upload a new syllabus file or a new calendar or any file that they might have, that they've created, made changes in the file in the middle of the term and they re-uploaded a new version of that file. I was under the impression that instructors would then have to go through and change all of the links in their Carmen course to reflect the new file that had been uploaded. And perhaps those instructors were changing the file name. Holly mentioned that if she doesn't change the file name, she doesn't need to update all of those links. But this is a more seamless way to do that, where you don't have to keep uploading the file every time you make a change to it. If you just link to the OneDrive file and you've granted permissions for anyone with the link to be able to view that file, any changes that you make over the course of the term will be reflected anytime a student clicks on that file, right? The one caveat there is that if a student downloads the file onto their computer, obviously, if you update the file in OneDrive, it's not going to change the file they've downloaded, their personal version of that file on their computer. So you might want to mention to students somewhere in your Carmen course or send them a message through Carmen saying that the syllabus has been updated. Be sure that you take a look at the new version, and you could include the link there. Or, I made some changes to an assignment. You would want to let them know that you made changes. You wouldn't just want to make changes and not let your students be aware of those changes. Because obviously students do oftentimes download files onto their personal computer. And then the next thing that we were looking at here is how you're sharing videos in Carmen. So ideally, what you're doing when you're sharing a video in Carmen is you are not uploading the video into Carmen. We've already mentioned that you're uploading those videos into MediaSite. And then what you'd want to do in MediaSite is go to the share presentation link, which is showing on your screen right now. And in that share presentation link, sometimes instructors might want to just copy at the top where it says quick link and then paste that quick link code or HTML code into their Carmen page. And that works. It's not that it doesn't work, but what it will do is it will force the student to click the link. It'll open a new browser tab where they're viewing that video like in its own separate tab. So ideally what you would want to do instead is you want to copy the embed code, which you saw like where that was in the previous slide, where that embed code is. You copy that and then you can paste it into your Carmen course. And at the upper right, you can see the icon that you use. That's the embed code icon in Carmen. And you would click that, and then you would paste the embed code into that screen there. A lot of people think embedding videos into your Carmen courses can be a hassle because it's like using HTML code, but they have made it pretty easy to do that with just copying and pasting. And you would paste that embed code there in Carmen and say submit. And then that would make it so the video actually appears in the Carmen page. So students wouldn't need to click a link or navigate outside of your Carmen course. They would stay within that page. They'd be able to view the video. Typically, it has the little icon, so you can make it full screen to view the video if they want to do that. But they're all still in that same Carmen environment, and that embed code allows them to do that.
So to kind of put a cap on all of this, we have one more activity that we would like for you guys to do. And this one is going to require you to all break out into breakout rooms. Now, my apologies in advance. There are far more people in this workshop than any workshop on file management has any right to have. But at the same time, that means the conversation is probably going to be very robust and full. So in breakout rooms, what I would like for you guys to do is to read one of the assigned scenarios with your group. Now, Queenie is going to share the document with the 3 scenarios. And each of you will be put into a room and be assigned one of those scenarios. The scenarios themselves are short little snippets of struggles that faculty have had with their file management strategies. You know, each one kind of outlines a sort of challenge or a struggle that a particular instructor is having with file management. And it provides an opportunity for you to really look for potential avenues for improvement and remediation, potentially employing some of the strategies that you've learned over the course of this workshop. So over the next few minutes, we're going to be putting you into breakout rooms. If each breakout room could select one person to come back and report what you've discussed, what I would like is for each breakout room to discuss the scenarios, talk about potential improvements or remediations that could be made, and then come back and share in the chat possibly 1 or 2 of the best recommendations that you guys came up with. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your vacation. So let's go ahead and begin. I would like to talk about scenario number 1. In the chat, if you could share, maybe each group could share their 1 or 2 of the top recommendations you would provide for this instructor. Absolutely, Jennifer. You know, that's a great recommendation, using OneDrive, a OneDrive link to the syllabus so that the revisions are always clear. And I think OneDrive is an excellent option for sharing your syllabus. Proofing and editing prior to submission, yeah, obviously. Instead of using Buckeye Box, Manuel should use OneDrive, which will sync his revisions. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great recommendation. And then Abigail says, don't have a lot of versions available to students. You can delete or hide old ones. And I think that's one thing that we need to kind of emphasize here. You can delete outmoded or older versions of your files. You should not let them linger around like lonesome ghosts. So if students are logged into Carmen, but not to OneDrive, can they open the links to OneDrive on Carmen? And I believe, let's see, I think they would have to log into OneDrive. They would have to do authenticate and everything.
They would need to be logged into OneDrive, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about scenario number 2. Now, I think a smaller number of you discussed this one. but I would really like to hear some of the remediations you had for scenario 2. So let's see. Brian says, videos and media site embedded in Carmen. Absolutely. Lecture videos and weekly modules, shorter videos, better audio, buy a microphone. But that's beyond the scope of this presentation. I think having the videos and media site and embedded in Carmen is going to provide a real help for this instructor. Just sending students to a big, massive mega folder of all the lectures. That's gonna, yeah. And Lindsay's right. Students don't need to download 1080p version of the videos. You're not watching, Avatar. This is a lecture video. Include comprehension checks in the videos to provide students more guidance. Absolutely, Kristen. And then finally, scenario 3, what are some of the things you talked about with that? What are some of the remediations you gave for this particular instructor? And to answer a question that was asked earlier, I'm just finding out that students have the same access to MediaSite as faculty and staff. So if anyone was curious about that. So Robert mentions that organizing everything for documents in Carmen rather than OneDrive, then you can include items and modules for each week and students can't edit those files. Absolutely, right? Some files should not be shareable and editable by a large swath of people. Make Excel files read only. Yes, Vicky. I feel like that is the primary thing I would recommend this particular instructor. Anything else about any of the scenarios before we move on? You guys did, you made short work of these scenarios. So kudos to everyone here. Great job. Vicky, don't undersell yourself. That was a great recommendation. Muted.
I'm gonna move us over for timing. Let's do our reflection plan.
Perfect.
So in wrapping things up here, the first question that I'm posing here would be, how will you know which file management space to use for a specific file type? So if anyone would like to mention that in the chat, like how do you decide whether or not to put a file into your Carmen course, or instead it would be better off if you wanted to change the permissions on a file that you have in OneDrive and just share the file in OneDrive and, share the OneDrive file into your Carmen course rather than uploading it into the Carmen course. That's something that perhaps you could comment upon in the chat. And then the second thing that's mentioned there is which strategy will you need some practice or support to do well? And for many people, that might be something related to file naming conventions or strategies for updating files that you once were sharing perhaps from Buckeye Box, but now are going to be needing to use OneDrive instead. Right, so Dominique mentioned practicing MediaSite. I know that some people have, it's a little different than YouTube. So some people need to familiarize themselves with the MediaSite interface. But it's one of those things that once you sort of poke around in a little bit, it does become easier to work in.
And I would, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I would also say for folks who have used MediaSite in the past and didn't care for it, there have been considerable improvements in the past year or two. And I would really recommend giving it another shot.
Right. So Holly mentioned that it would depend on how frequently you want to alter a file. That would dictate whether or not you might want to share it in OneDrive versus just upload it directly into Carmen. Lindsay says that she's leaning toward putting as much into OneDrive versus Carmen as possible, so you don't have to deal with the duplication across OneDrive and Carmen, and that's true. I know that I believe Brian brought up earlier that sometimes he prefers to have the files in Carmen because if he then needs to share a Carmen course with a different instructor, all of the files are in there. So that's definitely something that you'd want to consider and keep in mind if that's something that you see yourself needing to do in the future. Let's see here. We have a lot of them scrolling up here. So Abigail says, how well does it work to have links in modules? My modules are essentially collections of files as I've done synchronous lectures. Carmen is a support and repository. I think it works well to have links in modules. It depends on how, like your teaching strategy and what works well for you. I don't think there's one right answer to that question. Do you have any insight into that, Charles?
I would say it works well. My only caveat is make sure that each link is clearly labeled and named. Don't just put like a list of random URLs underneath each module. You want to make sure that everything is very navigable and clear for students, so they'll know what they're accessing at any given moment. So use the same strategies, even if you're just linking out to other sources, and make sure that those things that you're linking out to are accessible.
And I think in the interest of time, Stephanie is going to move on and start wrapping up.
Yeah, so one thing before you all leave that I want to make sure that you do is to save the chat. Queenie may have already put the instructions in there. I'm sure she'll do it again, but it's the 3 little dots down at the bottom of your chat window. It's on the right. There are a lot of resources that Queenie shared here, ideas that you share with each other, which we are so grateful that you were so gracious and sharing of your ideas and struggles. So we want to make sure that you have that. So save that for us. And I want to make sure that you know that there are a couple of resources for you. And hopefully you've also downloaded the slides so you have access to this. This will be put up on our Teaching and Learning Resource Center as a video probably in about a week and a half. We just have to deal with all the captions and cleaning things up, and then it will be up there so you can see it again. But also in the Teaching and Learning Resource Center, there are a ton of new articles. We add some all the time on teaching resources that are from our partners, but also for us. And in there, you can get more information from the tool set. And that is where Queenie sent a lot of those links are from our Teaching and Learning Resource Center. So feel free to check on that. And if you have questions that we have not answered, please do not hesitate to contact us. Don't call us. No one's working on campus, but contact us through also through the TLRC, our Teaching Resource Center, through our consultation process. And that's the direct link for you in that second bullet. And if you're just wondering, like, okay, Stephanie, Charles talked to me and tried to convince me to use MediaSite, and Carol says it's a good idea, but I just don't know how to do it. That's where you can connect with us, and then one of our consultants will work with you. And then lastly, I just want to make sure that you know that this particular session does count for 2 of our teaching endorsements. So if you're doing a teaching endorsement through the Drake Institute, there are 2 that we host here in Odie. That's for teaching online, as well as technology enhanced teaching. And this particular session counts for either of those. So please make sure you go to that link if you have questions about endorsements. So we're going to stick around for about 5-6 minutes or so. If you have questions that we have not answered, you do not have to hang around with us. You're welcome to go and spend the rest of your afternoon, maybe not thinking about file management, but hopefully you learned something. And I was really glad to see that you had lots of good suggestions of things that maybe you want to start trying out. So thank you for joining us. I want to thank Charles and Carol for developing this session and for doing a great job facilitating it. They were like perfectly on time and everything with their session. And also thank you as always to Queenie for being an incredible chat monitor. I'm always appreciative of how resourceful she is. So for those of you who need to go, thank you so much. We appreciate you. We look forward to seeing you at future sessions.